A very warm welcome to all those classical musicians out there who want to grow and expand a creative lifestyle both on and off stage. My name is Karin Bonelli. I'm flutist at the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra, a passionate explorer and seeker in musical and personal growth, and founder of Penthesilea Academy, the most innovative masterclass designed for audition preparation. This podcast is for you if you're searching for new ideas to elevate the productivity of your musical practice and your level of focus and expression on stage. But that's not all. In each episode, you will find bits and pieces to integrate into your everyday life, as well as new perspectives and insights by our experienced and passionate team and guests. Music is not a job. It is a way of living. My name is Karin Bonelli, and this is Penthesilea on Air. Welcome again to Penthesilea on Air podcast, where we explore the inner and outer journeys of creativity, courage, and stepping into your full potential. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Tara Mohr, a leading voice in women's leadership and well-being. Tara is the author of Playing Big, Practical Wisdom for Women Who Want to Speak Up, Create, and Lead, a book that has inspired thousands of women around the world to take bold steps toward their dreams, whatever playing big means for them. She's the creator of the global Playing Big leadership program and the Playing Big facilitators training for coaches, therapists, and mentors. A certified coach, Stanford MBA, and Yale literature graduate, Tara's work has been featured everywhere, from the New York Times to the Today Show and Harvard Business Review. But more than accolades, Tara's work resonates deeply because it speaks to something universal: the inner blocks and the inner wisdom that shape our creative lives. Though Playing Big was written with women in mind, I found its insights incredibly relevant to musicians of all genders and ages. Anyone striving to live more fully in their voice, their art, and their calling. Her work has become a foundation in my own coaching, and today I'm thrilled to dive into some of the most powerful ideas from her book and explore how they can guide us as artists, dreamers, and humans. Welcome, Tara Mohr. I'm so excited to have you here today. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Tara, Playing Big has a double meaning for our community of classical musicians who are in the midst of their biggest period of growth, most of them, in their studies or just applying to numerous orchestra jobs around the world. In coaching them or in flute lessons with them, I realized again and again that if they start to play bigger, that is to say, if they grow more as a person and they allow themselves to take up more space in their lives and relationships, it has influence on so many layers of their being, on their body posture, on their breath capacity, on their free creativity, and so much more, so that they actually start to play bigger on their instruments as well. Their sound expands, their phrasing becomes more free, and they become more flexible and expressive as a musician. So the tools and ideas you give in your book have not only highly influenced my work with our academy students, but has led them to experience self-efficacy on a whole new level. I really want to say a big thank you from this community of musicians for giving us this abundance of ideas for our personal and artistic growth. It has already made such a big difference in many lives, not only for women, actually.
Wow. That's amazing to hear. I'm so touched to hear that. And it's a different impact of the Playing Big work than I've really heard about before, not just because it's classical music, which we've had different classical musicians in our programs over the years, but the fact that you can observe that connection so clearly between what's happening in people's inner lives and where they're coming from, and then the sound or the art that they can produce. That's really powerful to hear. And it does make
Yeah.
perfect sense.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's evident. So let's dive right in. I would like to start with one of your chapters in the book was callings. So many musicians describe making music as their calling. How would you describe your own calling, and how did you first recognize it?
Hmm. Beautiful question. Yes. So my definition of a calling is it's the assignment that we receive to bring love or goodness or light into the world in some particular way.
Mm.
So there's a sense of assignment that goes with it. That's that sense of call. Like I didn't get to just go to the buffet of life choices and pick out the one that I liked best, because probably, right, if most of us could do that, we would choose something that felt less challenging or more convenient or more widely understood or widely approved of, or maybe less scary to us than our callings usually feel. And it's always about bringing the good into the world in some particular way. And of course, there's such varied ways that as human beings we can do that. So for me, I would say the calling that guided the playing big work was a calling to create a world where women's voices were shaping the world and present and really guiding what was happening in that world in a much more significant way than what I experienced growing up. And now that's still a calling, but I would say the work it's morphed into for me is it's more about really bringing more compassion into the world. And how do we help build our capacity to just love human beings and all forms of life more fiercely?
Wow. Yeah, that's a big one, definitely.
Yeah, it is a big one.
And do you have the feeling that you ever got off track with your calling, and how did you find your way back, maybe?
What a great question. Yes. So definitely off track. For me, I had an interesting childhood where my mom was very interested in psychology and spirituality. And so we were always in conversation about those things. And I had access to a lot of books and knowledge about that world. But then I was also very much expected to do really well in school and achieve in a traditional way. And there often was really a clash between those two worlds. It'd be like I'd read a spirituality book and it would say, all human beings are sort of equally precious and divine. And then I'd go to school and we were ranked, and we could talk about the kind of ranking energy in the classical music world, which I think is
Mm.
tough. But those ideas in conflict. So for me, traditional educational environments actually took me pretty far away from trusting my own internal voice, feeling enough to create, um, feeling comfortable embracing spirituality, not adopting the voice of those environments, which kind of said, well, critical thinking can't go with spirituality, or that's naive, or that's Pollyanna ish. So through college and graduate school, I think I lost a lot of connection with my callings and my voice and my authentic self. And then I had to find my way back. And I do see that a lot of people I work with kind of need a recovery period after their education to find themselves again and
Mm.
to take the best of that education, but not take the parts that were limiting. And that recovery can be hard to do. It can be hard to figure out how to do.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll absolutely dive into the world of criticism and judgment of the classical music
Yes.
later in our conversation. Before, I wanted to ask you, because I read that beautiful newsletter of yours. I mean, I'm reading all of them, but one of the last ones was about how to discern whether something is truly a calling. And I was thinking of some of my students because for some of them, there's this nagging doubt, mostly if they've experienced quite some disappointments in auditions. Uh, a voice that says, is that really what I'm meant to do? Or is it just all I've ever known since I've been a kid? Because many of us start out at a very young age, sometimes not even choosing the instrument ourselves. What would you say to those questioning whether music is truly their path?
Mm. Well, a couple things. First of all, I would say I don't think we only get one calling. And that is
Mm,
kind of a myth, much like if you think of the romantic myth that there's one soulmate only on this planet for you, and you find it and then you ride off into the sunset together and it's happily ever after.
mm,
And, most of us, no, someone can be a soulmate and they're if it's such that comes to a close, like life will offer us more opportunities for love and connection. And I think callings are the same way. So that's just one piece. Is sometimes the first thing is to change the question, not is this what I'm meant to do, but what's calling me right now?
mhm,
And is a pause calling me? Is a different instrument calling me? Is moving into composing calling me? Is performing in a different environment calling me? Is teaching instead of, so listening for that, and then really noticing. Usually, our callings show up in one of two ways. So it can show up as a sort of persistent idea about something you want to do or create. So that might look like, oh, I just really, can't escape the feeling that I'm meant to be making this kind of music in this kind of way. Or it could be I'm getting, a piece that comes to you if you're a composer, a creator, is a calling in itself. Like it comes knocking at the door, right? But also sometimes our callings show up in the second way, which is that we have a particularly strong sense of pain or frustration about some aspect of how things are. So it's like maybe you're getting a calling around changing the audition process. Maybe you're getting a calling around changing healthcare benefits for musicians. Maybe you're getting a calling around changing how education happens. Those are really important too, to notice what is it that you feel like, oh, that just could be so much better. And the way it is driving me crazy. That's sometimes how those assignments
mm,
come. Um,
yeah.
but of course, just to go back to one more thing about your question, you know, things not always working out or not getting a positive reception is not really what we look for is this like my calling or not? Often the road with our callings is very nonlinear, it's very treacherous, it's very challenging. It does require us to grow. So we're looking more for, do I feel that sense of assignment? Am I getting those persistent ideas about what I want to create, or tugs about what I want to create, or that really persistent frustration about something as it is and a fire in my belly to change it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel that it takes a lot of courage to really ask those questions because mostly in classical music, we take the classical path. That is, we want to go into the orchestra and we don't really dare to question if that is really my calling.
Hmm.
So I feel that, yeah, there maybe has to be a certain level of confidence. And talking of confidence, because it's also a recurring theme, of course, among my students. Yeah, how can I get more confident? And how can I get
Yeah.
more confident on stage? And you challenge the idea that confidence must come first in your book. I find that extremely interesting because instead you offer the concept of the inner mentor. Can you explain to our audience what or who that is?
Yes, yes. So the inner mentor is a part that all of us have, but most of us don't get educated that we have it. Nobody talks to us about it. And it's that voice of inner wisdom inside of us. It tends to be a voice that is also very calm and very loving. And it talks to us in a way that's very different from our everyday thinking. And it knows things that we don't really know in our everyday thinking. If you've ever felt really confused and like your head was full of mental chatter, and then something happened that really helped you slow down and sense what was really true for you. Maybe you sat by the ocean, or maybe you had a really good conversation with a friend that sort of led you to that truth, or maybe you just had a good cry and then you realized it. You were touching into that voice. And different schools of thought in psychology and different spiritual traditions all have different names for it. It could be called inner mentor. It could be called the still small voice. It could be called the higher self. It could be called your inner wise one. Carl Jung kind of called it the self with the capital S, right? So lots of different thinkers and traditions point to it in different ways. And as you're saying, what we're really looking for is how do we check in with that voice regularly and let it lead us? And how do we be called by something bigger than confidence? Because ultimately, confidence is just self assessment. So we can talk about this for a second. So self criticism and self confidence are forms of self assessment.
Mm-hmm.
And self assessment makes human beings suffer. Nobody is happy when they're self assessing. We are not happy if we're looking in the mirror and self assessing how our hair is looking that day. We're not happy if we're self assessing, thinking, am I ready to try out for that role? We suffer a lot when we do self assessment, and we're also not accurate self assessors. We can get it wrong in all different directions, but we're definitely not reliable. So that's a little tricky because, of course, as an artist, you also, and I can say, as a writer, it's like, well, I do need some process for looking at the work and saying, is it ready yet? Which part needs extra attention? Yes. So we might be assessing the work. We're assessing how we're doing with a particular piece of work, but we're not assessing, do I measure up? Am I good enough? That we're not good at, and it's the territory of suffering. So whether we're talking about confidence or self-criticism, we're actually just trying to really sidestep that whole place of judging ourselves, whether we're beating ourselves down or pumping ourselves up. It's a roller coaster ride either way. And instead, stay closer to things like, what's calling me? How do I want to live in such a way that I go out at the end feeling like, yeah, I really did this life in the way that I wanted to? What are the values I want to show up with today? Right? In other words, you can get yourself to a scary audition because you're trying to be confident and say, I can do it, I can do it. But that doesn't usually feel very solid to people. But if I get myself to the audition because I'm saying, well, I already chose to live my life by courage, that's the value. And this is the brave thing I can do today. Or I chose to live my life through the value of love of beauty. And I think I can create beautiful work with these people. That's a more reliable place to stand.
Absolutely. And it makes the inner mentor then accessible also in the moment of the performance, right? Or is that a matter of how much you've been in contact with her and how much you have practiced with her? Or can you just instantly also like get to her when you're on stage?
Yeah, great question. So for people interested in the inner mentor, we should say you don't have to just figure out from what I'm saying here how to meet yours. There's a guided meditation you can do that will help you get a sense of her. And we can put the link maybe in the show notes because anyone can access it for free.
Thank you.
So you can do that. It'll just take you about 20 minutes. You find a quiet, uninterrupted place where you can be. And that will give you an initial sense of her and an initial kind of meeting with her. And then once you have that sense, exactly as you're saying, you can, in a challenging moment, say, how would she approach this challenging moment? How does she perform? How does she prepare for a performance? How does she think about an audition? How does she deal with conflict maybe that you're having with a colleague? You can keep asking, how would she do it? And sort of watch the movie of that and then step into her shoes. Or sometimes you can even go have a little chat with her, like close your eyes. Okay, I'm going to go visit her in her house again. that you discovered through the meditation. And I'm going to ask her a question. How would you approach this? Or I'm so nervous. I can't even remember notes. I'm so scared. What should I do? And she will have answers for you. So those are two ways we can tap in. And yeah, it is pretty, for most people, it is pretty accessible once they get that initial sense of her. I don't know what your experience has been or your
Yeah,
clients.
absolutely. I've used it many times now, and it's always, people always go out of the coaching as if they were like 30 centimeters higher somehow
Mm.
above
Yeah.
the floor. So it's, yeah, they just feel their power instantly. And this is the beautiful thing about it, I think. Yet her voice often is quite quiet in comparison to the inner critic. And I'm so interested. Why is that?
Yeah. I often say the inner critic will interrupt and intrude on our thinking, on our living, and the inner mentor has to be invited in.
Mm.
And, you know, I don't know the, well, actually, I mean, I was going to say I don't know the biological reasons. I could posit some of the biological reasons. I think in a more poetic sense, I sometimes will say like the inner mentor voice like loves us so much that she's always sort of respectfully waiting to be invited. She's never going to interfere until we're saying like, no, I do want to hear. I'm ready to hear. But in another sense, we could say that the inner critic voice, which is that mental chatter, it's a lot of worry, it's a lot of anxiety, it's a lot of stress. Um, it's a sense of fear or threat. I'm going to embarrass myself. I'm going to mess up. You have no idea what you're talking about. We know from our biology that um, anything in the world, right, and life that seems threatening, and lots of things come at us that seem a little threatening or a little scary or a little dangerous to our sense of self or our comfort zone or our belonging, like all those fears of rejection, embarrassment, failure, that activates our nervous system into a fear state. And that has then a set of often self-critical thoughts that go with it. That calm state actually does in a world that is full of stressors, it is something that has to be sort of cultivated and sought. It's not our baseline.
Mm.
um, and it's interesting even learning more about the nervous system recently in my own life and in the polyvagus nerve. um, it, it, they're really understanding the biology of that. It's not even that human beings like would be calm if nothing else were happening and then these stressors come and zap us. It's actually like you need things to sort of uh, pump the brake of calm in your system. And with nothing happening as human beings, we often just tend towards the stress state, which is really interesting. So we all have to have our practices. Inner mentor is one of them, but it could also be slowing down and taking a few deep breaths, and it could be doing a gratitude list that essentially keep resetting our nervous system out of that fear-based, scarcity-oriented state.
Mm. I love the picture of her waiting to be invited in the mentor because she's so respectful of us. I think that's a beautiful picture. Great.
Mm,
And yeah, but the inner mentor for some musicians is also kind of, the inner critic is sort of a motivator also in the practice room. And then students say, yeah, but how can I stay motivated and how can I push myself forward if I don't listen to this inner critic voice? Can we ever truly detach motivation from our inner critic?
yeah, I think we can, and I actually think we have to.
Hmm.
So here are some of the problems with being motivated through your inner critic's voice and through those harsh criticisms. Just sort of like having the taskmaster standing over you, hitting you again and again, and being motivated by that. So number one is just from a health point of view. When you are ruminating in those self-critical thoughts, you're in a stressed state, right? Your body's saying like there's a danger here, there's an emergency, I'm not good enough, I'm going to fail. And so we've got the stress hormones flooding through our body.
Mhm.
And what we know about human biology is that we are designed to have occasional stressors that create that flare of hormones and then settle down. That's if you think of our mammal, our mammal cousins, right? They are up, there's a predator on the horizon. They get flooded with adrenaline. They can sprint quickly and then it's over. And then they're lying in the field again for the next several hours. That's kind of how what our biology is designed for. But in modern life, or when we get into sort of modern psychology, we can chronically stress ourselves where we're working every day with stress inducing thoughts, self critical thoughts. And if we're living ongoingly with those kind of stress hormones in our body, that is the number one cause of serious chronic health issues. It's literally toxic to us. So even if you're bought in psychologically to being motivated that way, no, it is taking a real serious toll on your body. Number two is that it's really not fun. Like at a certain point, I think we have to decide, is that the quality of life that I want? Is to have the thing that's driving me also feel so fear inducing and unpleasant. And then, really, my favorite one, the one that I feel most passionate about, the biggest issue here, I think, is that if you're being motivated by your inner critic, you will try to get every detail right, right? You will try to get sort of more perfect in the most narrow, limited sense, but you won't be thinking, how do I make this more expressive? Or how do I make this piece more unique? Or how do I really make my mark with how I'm doing this? Or, what's the next unlocking of artistic power I could bring here? All the things you're talking about. So, in many of the fields that I'm working with people in, I'll call that, you can listen to your inner critic and it will help you be a better worker bee. You dot every I, you cross every T, but it will never help you be a game changer. And it will never really help you have a more fulfilling career.
Yeah.
So there's a huge opportunity cost to being motivated that way.
Mm-hmm. And can we ever get rid of the inner critic, no matter in the practice room or in our lives, or is it just about changing the relationship with him or her?
Yeah, yeah. So what most of us think, right, is that we somehow could get rid of this inner critic, either because we're going to figure out how to be better humans and quote unquote be confident, or because we're going to become more accomplished with time. That's a very common misconception, right? Like when I get to this level, this self doubt will go away. If I could only win this award, the self doubt will go away. All of the research shows that that's not what happens, that achievement has no bearing on levels of self doubt. Sometimes it makes it worse.
Mm.
And anecdotally, too, you can hear from people in every field. It doesn't matter if I won the Nobel Prize yesterday. I may still be saying it's like, oh, now I know I won the Nobel Prize. Everyone thinks I know what I'm talking about. Now I'm even more panicked, right? Story after story like that.
Yeah.
So we don't want to make that assumption that it's coming later, and we don't want to wait on confidence. And really, what I talk about in the Playing Big book, and as I'm sure you're doing with many of your clients too, is we're just learning, how do I work with that self-doubt when it comes up? How do I have a wise response to it, a wise relationship to it, knowing it will always come up if I'm on my edge.
Mm.
And especially when we're talking about art, if we're making real art, it will feel vulnerable. We could stay in a box and be good imitators and follow all the rules, and it will probably feel less vulnerable. But if you really are going to give your all to something or do it with your particular twist, it's going to feel vulnerable. And that means that self-doubt is going to come up as part of the protective response. So we do really need to learn to work with it.
Yeah, you talk about that in those moments where we get out of our comfort zones, it's like a watchdog getting out and yeah, making us anxious to stay within our line again. But how do we really tell the difference if this is a bad gut feeling we're just receiving, or like an intuition that we shouldn't do something, or that it's just the inner critic watchdog that is like barking at us?
Yeah. There's a lot of different ways we can do that. I mean, in a way, I think coaching offers us a million tools for that. So if you're not sure, you could say, let me go consult my inner mentor. What does she say? What would she do? You could say, if I was bringing a spirit of curiosity and love to this situation, what would I do? You could say, let me play the movie of me doing this thing that feels scary and notice all the feelings that come up and kind of process them, meet them with a lot of compassion, and then see how the thing feels. There's so many good coaching questions we can ask
Mm,
ourselves. All at their essence, we're trying to get out of the fear energy, make contact with another energy, and then look back at the same situation from that new
mm,
energetic
yeah.
perspective.
Do you feel that women have more a stronger inner critic maybe than men do?
I- In essence, yes.
Okay.
And the research on this is not as clear and it's just not as thorough as we would want it to be. I think, most women feel like this is a central topic in their lives, self doubt and the inner critic. But the sort of scientific world of psychology has not made it a major topic. You mentioned self-efficacy. There's a lot of studies on that. So I always like to say, the research I would want to see to really empirically back that up is not there. But anecdotally, yes, we see so much of this. And really, if you think about, okay, if self-doubt is going to come when something feels out of my comfort zone, we know that for women, there's going to be a lot of things that feel out of our comfort zone that wouldn't feel that way to male counterparts. Being
Mm.
in an orchestra where only 10% are women already takes us a little out of our comfort zone. And the research shows that you need 30% of a minority group to kind of cross that tipping point where the people in that group can come out of fight or flight a little bit and feel like they have more power and voice. Having power as a woman takes us out of our comfort zone because women with power get torn down by society a lot. Being visible takes us out of our comfort zone because for a lot of human history, being visible as a woman wasn't very safe. It wasn't something you would want to be. And epigenetically, we still feel that in ourselves. Failing at a particular thing is more out of our comfort zones for women because um, it can have more costly effects in our career because of how we're interpreted and read. Or it may just echo our own internal doubts that, oh, I wasn't really meant for this anyway, just like the world told me I wasn't. So all of those things, for very reasonable causes, contribute to kind of a more active inner critic around these kinds of issues of professional life and visibility. Interestingly, there's a couple studies that suggest that men have a more active inner critic. Like if you define a task around, if you say this task requires really great emotional intelligence and really great reading of nonverbal cues, go do it. They can measure that men will have a more activated, stress response and self doubt. But when we're talking about leadership, visibility, power, self expression, sort of professional self actualization, we see a lot more self doubt from women.
Oh wow, so interesting. Yeah, I joined the Vienna Philharmonic at age 23, and we were about 10% women back then, I think. I was the first female wind player, not the first female in the orchestra. Outwardly, I fit in well, but something kind of felt off, and maybe this comes from this direction you're just talking about. It was like I had to adopt an energy that wasn't truly mine. Is there such a thing as an unspoken male way of working or being that women internalize without realizing it?
Mm. So there's so many different ways to look at that. And we could talk about male versus sort of masculine as, more of an attribute.
Yeah.
But certainly whether you think, you can, some people would lean more nature here and say, yeah, there's real biological differences. Some people would just say, well, even if we don't even have to theorize about biological differences. We just know boys were socialized really differently. They're going to see competition differently. They're going to see hierarchy differently. But yeah, I mean, in my experience, and I would say it's such a combination of nature and nurture, and then how those things interact with each other over millennia and shape us. Very different relationships that women and men have to hierarchy,
Mhm.
competition, collaboration, evaluation, which is a big part, right, of what's happening in the field, feedback, criticism, um, communication. I mean, really significant differences. And I do think that when we say, oh, everything's fine, it's a level playing field, there's no gender anything going on here just because we're a co-ed group, that's not true.
Mm.
Gender is its own kind of culture. And so places have culture that are related to gender.
Yeah, and one of the things you write about in your book is that women often pick up more emotional data in the room. Like in orchestra settings, that sensitivity is both a strength and a burden, I would say, in my experience. And how can we protect ourselves from emotional overload in these high pressure group environments?
Yeah, that's such a great point to bring up in terms of orchestra life. And yeah, I'll sometimes call this the noisy room.
Mm.
That if you are more attuned to people's nonverbal cues or just the relational dynamics, which many women are. And I think that's probably been a survival strategy for us over the millennia. Like, if you don't have the formal power, you have to read what's going on in the room. You have to know, right? Like, where you're welcome, where you're not, who's got conflict brewing with who. That's going to help you navigate those situations. So we do tend to pick up a lot, and it's interesting because I think in the 90s and the early 2000s, it was sort of this explosion of content about the importance of EQ skills, of emotional intelligence. And so they think, yeah, the more you can read people's cues, the better. Well, research shows, as you're pointing to, people who in the workplace, people who are picking up high levels of this information, people who have very high EQ, they struggle more with depression. They struggle more with morale at work and with productivity. And it's no wonder, because you cannot plow ahead, right, with your tasks if you're getting all that contextual information and you're weighing how much to incorporate it or not, or you're just feeling unsettled by it. So, yeah, I think, protecting ourselves, I don't know that I think about it that way, but just starting to have an awareness practice. Is that me? What am I picking up? You might just take a little bit of time to journal about it. What am I picking up that's in the room? How is that affecting me? Do I want it to affect me in that way, or make another choice? And sometimes just it is helpful to just decide, I'm going to tune that out. Like, yeah, there are these subtle dynamics. Yeah, so and so doesn't get along with so and so, but I'm not going to carry that on my shoulders. I am going to set it aside, and we're going to move forward.
Mhm. So that we can feel it, but not be so much influenced by it.
Yeah.
Mm.
Hmm.
Yeah. Now you've touched quite, I think, two or three times already on a very important topic, and that is praise, criticism, validation. Because in our classical music world, as you already said, we're often so hooked and actually dependent on external validation because praise, competition results, juror feedbacks are omnipresent.
Yeah.
And how can musicians reclaim their own artistic voice in such a feedback saturated environment?
Yeah. Yeah. So, the core principle that I use around unhooking from praise and criticism is that feedback tells you about the person or people giving the feedback. It doesn't tell you about you in some deeper, essential way. And that usually is like first of all, everyone goes, "What?" at first.
Exactly. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
so
what?
hard. Yeah.
Yeah. But really, I mean, it's so interesting because in so many different fields, I get to share that concept, and it is incorporated in corporations now as they do performance reviews. And it ultimately is so helpful. So what we're really saying here, it's a couple of things in the context of musicians. So it could mean just remembering, oh, this music teacher was giving me this feedback. I don't have to take that as the absolute truth. It's illuminating something about their perspective, their style, their preferences, their own training, perhaps their own blind spots too. So just starting to put it in that context rather than holding that person as the be all end all is huge. And that could be for any particular critic who gives you a review in the newspaper. It could be for any particular uh, conductor. But then also, and this is maybe a little bit more just tricky to even try on as an idea, but sort of how can we hold also the whole field of music or classical music as as also an entity that has a limited subjective perspective. And so the whole thing saying this is what better is, and this is what worse is, and this is the direction it should go, that is also that is telling us about that field.
Mhm.
And you might imagine if you were alive 200 years ago, probably the feedback on the same piece would be different. Maybe if you were in a different country, the feedback would be different. Or if you were working with a different composer, a different conductor, the feedback would be different. So remembering the context and that the feedback is just telling us about how to shape the work to a certain set of preferences and values. It's not telling us, am I talented or not? Am I good enough or not? Am I a good musician? That it's not meant to evaluate us in any essential sense. And one thing we do know about gender, especially, is that women, when they get tough feedback, they both personalize it, they make it more personal, and they tend to extrapolate from it to think something has like a permanent, it's speaking to a permanent truth about them. So if you can remember those two P's, when do I make it personal and when do I make it permanent? So it's not just, I had a bad day. It's not just, this piece maybe and me are not a great fit. It's now an essential, enduring quality of me. So those are all ways that we want to keep practicing unhooking. But I'll say I also think it's really tough. And I have one of my kids is very into classical music and in orchestra. And I am aware that I feel at a bit of a loss because with specifically with how to talk to him about this sort of very hierarchical, there's first chair, there's second chair, there's you made it, you didn't. Because most of the things I pursued in my life as a writer, in theater, in dance, there was a lot more room for sort of many different approaches to be celebrated. And I kind of avoided things that were so clearly hierarchical.
Mhm.
And so I think it's really tough being inside a system. I don't know. I'm curious what you find works for you or for your clients around that.
Yeah, it is tough. And as you say, the part we're all working most on is to not make it personal or permanent about ourselves,
Mm,
because that's when it gets really tricky. And it is also very tricky that sometimes in one audition, we usually have many jurors in one audition, and each juror might say something else. So which kind of feedback do I take in? Which one I not listen to? So to really find kind of a filter that works for them. Who is giving me feedback? Does this person have my best interest in mind? What happens if I incorporate that feedback? So to really ask those questions to become curious of what is helpful about the feedback are things that help. But it stays a work in progress, and I'm sure you've, even as a writer, you've also received feedback yourself. So how do you discern if you take it in or leave it out?
Right. It's really hard. And I think I am still figuring it out. And I mean, it's interesting because I'm working on a couple new book projects, and
Great.
I feel really excited to find the editorial team that I feel like I can really trust the feedback, and the way that the feedback is given feels good. My editor from Playing Big has retired and moved on. So it's like, it's an exciting opportunity. But I think about, one thing that's coming to mind as you share and as you ask that is, there's a line in The Artist's Way. I don't know if you know The Artist's Way, or if you were,
Yeah, I
yeah,
know it. Yeah.
Julia
Mhm.
Cameron's book, such a wonderful resource. And she
Yeah.
says, the good kind of criticism, it's like when you hear it, something clicks where you're like, oh, I knew it. Like, that's what it was. Thank you so much for putting words to it. Or you go, oh, right, that's going to take me to some exciting place. There is that click of recognition,
Mm.
where that's ultimately what we want from the critics and the editors. We want someone who can see what we couldn't see, but that something that is true. And I think we can trust our internal compass that, oh, yeah, the click tells me, you know, that's what I was missing, or I see how that's going to help me accomplish what I want to accomplish through this artistic project. Um, if it feels super dissonant, or even if you experiment with applying the feedback a little bit and it feels super dissonant, I think that's a good indicator too. I mean, it's interesting because in the coaching world, we use these musical terms. We say,
Yeah.
does this resonate, or does it feel dissonant? Which are not terms I ever heard anyone using in that way before I went to my coach training. So yeah, we are looking for resonance. We're looking for
Mhm.
internal resonance.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Those terms are linked, and something that holds us, or often holds us back on stage, and that students then feel is the generator of that bad feedback, is that they're just having huge amounts of stage fright.
Yeah.
So in your book, you offer two different types of fear, and I wonder if you could just briefly describe them for our listeners.
Yes.
So
Yes.
powerful.
Oh, I'm so glad that
Yeah,
resonated with you. Now I'm going to have
absolutely.
to giggle every time I say that. Yeah. So these two words for fear, these are two ancient Hebrew words. So they show up in the Old Testament. So they're a few thousand years old. So we know they've been with us in our human experience for a very long time. And the first term is pachad. And pachad is the fear of imagined things, or the fear of projected things, meaning I might fail. I might pass out on stage. I might forget what I'm supposed to do. The audience might walk out. It's so bad, right? This is our fear of projected or imagined things. In our contemporary, more biological understanding, sometimes you'll hear that called the lizard brain fear. Um, it's sort of our worst case scenario thinking. It's the scout that's looking out for what are the dangerous things that could happen. And we know from a lot of scientific research that that part of us is overreactive. It's not really concerned with what are the likely threats. It's concerned with what's any possible danger that could be here. It's very sloppy in sort of how it applies our past negative experiences to the future. It's too broad, like, oh, something's vaguely similar happened when I was 6, therefore this is terrifying also. So we really don't want to be run by that. And when we're in that kind of fear, we don't do our best thinking. We're not really open to connection. So it does not help us to be there. So that kind of fear many of us are familiar with, but there's also this second Hebrew term, which is yirah. And yirah shows up in a few different kinds of instances in Old Testament texts. It's the feeling we feel when we're suddenly inhabiting more space than we're used to, which could be literal space, literally a bigger stage, literally a bigger audience, or that internal space you're talking about in your sessions, just breathing more, holding more presence, taking up more room in your life. But when we are taking up more space than we're used to, or we're in a larger space, what's this fear like feeling that isn't just that regular contracted fear, but kind of this breathless, expansive fear? So that's yira. It's also described as this is how we feel when something happens that we suddenly have more of an infusion of energy than we're used to. So, in my coaching work, I see that when people are pursuing a passion or a calling or living by their values or telling themselves the truth about something where they've been maybe denying that truth. So, this infusion of energy that is also creates this sort of fear-ish, fear-like feeling, but a particular kind of fear. And then also, yira is what we feel in the presence of the sacred or the presence of the divine. So this is when Moses encounters the burning bush. This is the word that's used to describe how he's feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So all to say, right, when, for example, it's opening night of a performance, we're probably feeling both.
Yeah.
Right? We're feeling the, oh my God, what if I this? And I'm so nervous. And why did I choose this dress? And we're also, especially probably when we're on stage and we're doing it, and there's the sacredness of the music and the moment that has never occurred before, we're also feeling that yira. And what I found is it's very helpful to separate the two, to have language for both, and then to know there's nothing to do with yira except welcome it and try and catch our breath enough to breathe into it and stand in that heightened state that is fear and exhilaration and smallness and bigness and oneness, all at the same time. And let that be part of our life experience, to have those moments, not to contract away from it, not to numb it out, not to distract, but to really welcome those things that bring that feeling for us.
Yeah. So kind of a big yes to it. Yeah. Beautiful. I love the concept of those of these differences between the two. Do you have like a favorite ritual or practice before you, I don't know, speak in front of a crowd of many people, or before you do something new? Do you have something to ground yourself or to calm
Well,
Pachat?
it's interesting that you asked that, because it usually is music and dance.
Mm.
I'll usually put on, and sometimes I'll joke that I like my, even though, I'm Jewish heritage, I do like my Jesus rock. So I will sometimes put on my my Jesus rock before a talk. But yeah, I will use music quite a bit, and then music and movement together if I could, if that can happen. Like if I'm not backstage, but I'm waiting to go on Zoom or something, is really a winning combination. Because yeah, I mean, as you know, the preparation we need to do is not mental, it's really energetic. It's about
Mm.
what physiologic state am I in, and that's going to be based in the body. So that's, if I do anything, that's what I do. I might also say a quick prayer, which could be, just sort of turning over my smaller will to like, what's the larger will of what wants to happen here. Or I might say, may I be a representative of love
Mm.
in this thing, whatever it's going to be, that's happening. Yeah.
Beautiful. Surrendering to the moment.
Hmm.
Yeah, nice. So, yeah, we're already nearly at the end of our conversation, and I'm so curious, as it's the Playing Big book, which I warmly recommend not only to our musicians and not only to our female musicians, but to everybody, actually.
Yeah.
It has been written over a decade ago now.
Yeah.
So, with 11 more years of life experience. Are there any new chapters you'd add to the book today?
What a great question. Well, I wrote the book while I was pregnant with my first baby. And then he had just been born when it came out. And since that time, so now I have 3 children. And aging parents. And it's just been a very relationally intense decade of life. So what's interesting, I don't know that I would add chapters. I would add books, which is what I'm doing, because I think when I wrote Playing Big, and I'm sure, your listeners and the people you're coaching are all in different stages with caregiving and all of that. But when I wrote Playing Big, I was in my early 30s. I was in a phase of life that was about the journey of individual self-actualization, which all of us will have a chapter. And some of us have a chapter at 60, and some of us have that chapter at 30, right? It's different. But where the real core work that your soul is up to is like, what do I want to contribute in the world? Who am I as an individual, and how does that come into expression? How do I live more authentically? And in many ways, the coaching world is kind of built around those questions. What I didn't really know that now I know is that's only one of the journeys. That whole thing is only one of the human journeys. And there is another journey that I think is not about actualizing anything, really. It's about celebrating who we already are. And I think parenting asks us to do that, because you do not want to turn your children into projects of becoming. I mean, that's going on, but they're also asking to be celebrated in their cherubic glory every minute. And your life as a parent is going to be so much happier if you can do that. Yeah. So celebrating who we already are, and also, this incredibly formative journey of caregiving, which upends everything we thought we knew about life and human beings. So that's where I would go next. Yeah.
And can you give us a hint on your next writing project?
I'm working on 2 things right now. One of them is very much about that. It's about loving our people well, and to some extent about parenting. And then the other is about really my approach to coaching, and how can anyone have a coaching conversation and a coaching skill set so that when someone comes to you for a supportive conversation, you have something to do besides offer advice or change the subject or just listen, and you can really help that person find their own voice of inner wisdom, which is how I think of what coaching is. It's just facilitating someone's process to find their own inner wisdom. So that's the other one.
Wow, I'm so much looking forward to those. And I guess we can be updated on those through your newsletter.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, they're kind of in, nothing to run out and get. Yeah, but I will keep you posted. Yeah.
Yeah, I can really recommend subscribing to those newsletters. They're so inspiring. Every time I receive it, I'm like, yay. It's the only one of the very rare newsletters I'm really looking forward to.
Oh, thank you. We love hearing that, because we're always like, we got to keep it quality. And then we do hear from people. They're like, I can know if I'm going to open this, it won't just be, random whatevers. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Tara, for your contributions, for your passion, for your books, for sharing your time with us today. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you, to reading from you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this lovely conversation. I loved your very, very thoughtful and insightful questions, and I'm really glad we got to connect.
Thank you. Bye.